The dust-choked horizon swallowed Lucinda Carter's past as the stagecoach rumbled toward Hays City, Kansas, in the sweltering summer of 1871. She clutched her carpetbag tightly, its worn leather the only familiar thing in her new life as Lydia Collins, a name chosen carefully from a worn newspaper obituary she'd found on her journey west. The bruises on her wrists had faded, but the memories remained fresh as the day she'd fled Philadelphia, leaving behind a life of gilded privilege and hidden terrors. "First time in Hays, miss?" the elderly woman beside her asked, her kind eyes curious beneath the brim of her faded bonnet. Lydia nodded, her throat tight. "Yes, I'm hoping to make a fresh start here." "Well, honey, there's plenty of opportunity in Hays for those willing to work. Town's growing fast with the railroad and all. What's your trade?" "I'm a seamstress," Lydia replied, the lie coming easier now after weeks of practice. In truth, she had never sewn more than embroidery for pleasure, but she had stolen her mother's old sewing kit and several pattern books before fleeing. She would learn because she had to. The stagecoach jolted to a stop on Main Street, and Lydia descended into a world of dust, noise, and chaos. Hays City was everything and nothing like she had imagined. Wooden buildings stained with prairie dirt lined the street. Horses tied to hitching posts stamped impatiently, and everywhere men in dusty clothes and wide-brimmed hats moved with purpose. The railroad had brought civilization to this frontier outpost, but just barely. Lydia walked past the saloon where piano music spilled into the street along with raucous laughter. She kept her gaze lowered, mindful of the advice she'd received about drawing unwanted attention. The hotel she'd been recommended sat at the far end of Main Street, modest but respectable enough for a single woman of limited means. "Looking for something specific, madam?" A deep voice startled her from her thoughts. Lydia looked up to find herself face to face with a tall man leading a dappled gray horse. His face was partially shadowed by his hat, but his eyes, startlingly blue against sun-bronzed skin, studied her with unexpected intensity. "The Prairie Rose Hotel," she managed to say, her voice steadier than she felt. "You're headed the right way." He nodded down the street. "2 more buildings past the general store." He paused, studying her face a moment too long. "New to town?" "Yes." Lydia fought the urge to touch the scar hidden beneath her high collar, the mark Harold had left the night she decided to escape. "Just arrived." "Lucas Dawson," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "I run the Circle D ranch outside of town." "Lydia Collins," she replied, the false name still uncomfortable on her tongue. Something flickered in his eyes, a question, perhaps, or simple curiosity, before he nodded again. "Welcome to Hays City, Miss Collins. Hope you find what you're looking for here." As she hurried away, Lydia couldn't shake the feeling that his eyes had seen more than she wanted to reveal. But that was impossible. No one here knew who she was. No one could know what she'd done. The Prairie Rose Hotel was clean but spare, with a stern-faced proprietress who introduced herself as Mrs. Blackburn. She looked Lydia up and down with practiced skepticism. "Rooms 50 cents a night, includes breakfast. I don't allow gentlemen callers in the rooms, and I expect quiet after 9 o'clock. Will you be staying long?" "I hope to find more permanent accommodations once I secure employment," Lydia explained. "I'm a seamstress by trade." Mrs. Blackburn's eyebrows lifted. "Are you now? Funny coincidence." "Mrs. Sullivan just mentioned yesterday she's looking for someone with skill at the needle. Her shop's on 2nd Street. You might want to call on her tomorrow." That night, Lydia lay awake in the narrow bed, listening to the distant sounds of the saloon and occasional shouts in the street below. She pulled from her carpetbag the only personal item she dared bring, a silver locket containing a miniature portrait of her mother, gone 5 years now. If only her mother had lived, perhaps Lydia wouldn't have been forced into marriage with Harold Carter, her father's business associate, a man whose public charm masked a private cruelty that had nearly destroyed her. "I'm safe now," she whispered to herself. "He'll never find me here." Morning brought a watery sunshine through thin curtains, and the smell of coffee and bacon from downstairs. Lydia dressed carefully in her second-best dress, dark blue cotton with modest white collar and cuffs, and pinned her thick auburn hair into a simple chignon. The bruise on her cheekbone had faded enough that a light dusting of powder concealed it completely. Mrs. Sullivan's dress shop was a tidy establishment with a bell that chimed pleasantly as Lydia entered. Bolts of fabric lined the walls, mostly practical calicos and wools, though a few silks and finer materials caught the light from the front window. "Be with you in a moment," called a voice from the back room. Lydia took the opportunity to examine the dresses on display. The stitching was neat, but not particularly fine, certainly nothing like the couture gowns she had once worn to Philadelphia society events. Perhaps her limited experience would be enough after all. "Now then, what can I help you with today, Mrs. Sullivan emerged, a plump woman with graying hair and spectacles perched on her nose. Her eyes brightened when she saw Lydia. "Oh, a new face in town. Welcome, dear." "Thank you. I'm Lydia Collins. I've just arrived in Hayes City, and I heard you might be looking for a seamstress, Mrs. Sullivan's face lit up. "Indeed I am. My eyesight isn't what it used to be, and these fine stitches are getting harder by the day. Do you have experience?" Lydia's heart pounded. "I worked for a dressmaker in the East," she said carefully. "I'm quite skilled with both plain and decorative stitching." "Wonderful. I can offer you room and board above the shop plus $3 a week to start. If things work out well, we can discuss a better arrangement." It was less than Lydia had hoped, but more than she had reason to expect. "That would be suitable. When would you like me to start?" "Right away, if you're willing. I've a wedding dress that needs finishing by next week, and my fingers are cramping something fierce with all the detail work." By midday, Lydia had moved her meager belongings to the small but clean room above Mrs. Sullivan's shop and was seated by the window, carefully adding tiny pearl beads to the bodice of a wedding gown. Her shoulders ached from tension, but the familiar motion of needle through fabric calmed her racing thoughts. "You have a natural gift," Mrs. Sullivan observed, watching Lydia work. "Where did you say you're from?" "I didn't," Lydia replied, keeping her eyes on her work. "It's not important. I came west for a fresh start." Mrs. Sullivan nodded, seeming to understand. "Well, Hayes City is a good place for that, full of people making new beginnings." She patted Lydia's shoulder. "I'm closing the shop early today. It's Tuesday, and I always visit my sister for dinner on Tuesdays. You're welcome to continue working if you like, or explore the town a bit." After Mrs. Sullivan left, Lydia continued sewing until her eyes grew tired in the fading light. Finally setting aside her work, she decided to venture out for a brief walk. The evening air was cooler, the streets less crowded as townspeople retreated to their homes for supper. She walked toward the end of town, where open prairie stretched beyond the last buildings. The vastness of it took her breath away, so different from Philadelphia's crowded streets. Here, a person could disappear, could become someone new beneath that endless sky. "It grows on you, doesn't it?" The voice behind her was familiar, and Lydia turned to find Lucas Dawson leading his horse along the path that ran adjacent to the main street. "Mr. Dawson." She nodded, fighting the instinct to retreat. "Yes, it's quite beautiful. Most newcomers find it overwhelming at first." He smiled, the expression softening the weathered lines of his face. "Heard you've taken a position with Mrs. Sullivan." Lydia's eyebrows rose. "News travels quickly here, small town." He shrugged. "Especially when a new face as memorable as yours arrives." The compliment, casual as it was, brought warmth to her cheeks. It had been so long since a man had spoken to her with simple kindness rather than possession. "I should get back," she said, suddenly uncomfortable with her reaction to him. "Mrs. Sullivan will expect me early tomorrow." "Of course." He touched his hat brim again. "I'm bringing some cattle to market next week. We'll be in town for a few days. Perhaps I'll see you again, Miss Collins." As she hurried back to the shop, Lydia tried to ignore the flutter in her chest. Attachments were dangerous, especially with perceptive men like Lucas Dawson, whose steady gaze seemed to look straight through her carefully constructed facade. She had escaped one man's control. She would not submit to another's, no matter how kind his eyes or gentle his manner. The following days settled into a routine. Lydia worked diligently, her skills improving with each passing day. Mrs. Sullivan was a patient teacher, showing her the tricks of measuring and fitting customers, how to alter patterns for different figures, and the proper way to handle the various fabrics they worked with. Word spread quickly about the new seamstress with the Eastern touch, and soon ladies from all over Hayes City were requesting Lydia's work specifically. Her precise stitching and eye for flattering details were unlike anything the frontier town had seen before. "You're a godsend, Mrs. Sullivan declared one evening as they tallied the day's receipts. "I've had more orders this month than in the previous 3 combined." Lydia smiled, genuine warmth spreading through her. For the first time in years, she was earning praise for her own merit, not for being Harold Carter's perfect society wife. "I enjoy the work," she admitted. "It's satisfying to create something beautiful with my own hands." "Well, at this rate, I'll need to increase your wages." How does $5 a week sound? It was more money than Lydia had dared hope for. That would be very generous. That night, as Lydia prepared for bed, she caught a glimpse of herself in the small mirror above her washstand. The haunted look was fading from her eyes, and color had returned to her cheeks. Freedom suited her, despite the constant fear that Harold might somehow track her down. Just as she was drifting off to sleep, shouts and crashes from the street below startled her fully awake. Peering cautiously through her window, she saw several cowboys engaged in a brawl outside the saloon across the way. The marshal was attempting to break up the fight, his voice sharp as he commanded them to disperse. Among the men, Lydia recognized Lucas Dawson, though he wasn't participating in the fight. Instead, he was pulling one of his ranch hands away from the fray, his expression a mixture of exasperation and concern. When the young man stumbled, Lucas caught him easily, supporting him as they moved away from the commotion. There was something in that gesture, the careful way he handled the younger man, firm but not cruel, that made Lydia watch a moment longer than she intended. When Lucas glanced up and caught her watching from the window, she quickly stepped back, her heart racing unexpectedly. Morning brought a flurry of activity to the shop. The mayor's wife was hosting a social the following weekend, and several ladies needed dresses altered or refreshed for the occasion. Lydia worked steadily, grateful for the distraction from her thoughts. Around midday, the shop bell chimed, and Lydia looked up to find Lucas Dawson standing in the doorway, looking somewhat out of place among the feminine surroundings of the dress shop. "Mr. Dawson." Mrs. Sullivan greeted him warmly. "What brings you to my establishment?" "Don't tell me you've taken up sewing," he laughed, a rich sound that filled the small shop. "No, madam, though I can mend a tear in a pinch. Actually, I've come about my sister. She's arriving from St. Louis next week to stay with me at the ranch, and I thought she might need some proper Western attire." "How thoughtful!" Mrs. Sullivan exclaimed. "Miss Collins here can help you with that. She has quite an eye for fashion." Lucas turned to Lydia, removing his hat. "Miss Collins." "Good to see you again, Mr. Dawson." She nodded, setting aside the bodice she was embroidering. "What sort of garments did you have in mind for your sister? I reckon she'll need riding clothes for certain, and whatever else ladies require out here. I'm afraid I'm at a loss. Elizabeth has been living in the city for 10 years now, and I doubt her fancy dresses will suit ranch life." Lydia considered this. "How long will she be staying?" "Indefinitely. Our parents passed last winter, and she's come to help me run the ranch." "I see." "Then she'll need practical day dresses, a few heavier skirts for riding, perhaps some split skirts if she'll be doing much horseback riding." Lydia began making notes. "And of course, at least one or two nicer dresses for church and social occasions." Lucas watched her with a bemused expression. "I'll trust your judgment completely, Miss Collins. Elizabeth is about your height, perhaps a bit fuller in figure. I've written down her measurements as best she could provide in her letter." He handed Lydia a folded piece of paper. Their fingers brushed briefly, and Lydia withdrew her hand quickly, ignoring the sudden warmth in her cheeks. "We'll need a deposit for the materials," she said professionally. "Of course." He counted out several bills. "Will this be sufficient to start?" The amount was more than generous. Lydia nodded, carefully recording the payment in the shop's ledger. "When does your sister arrive?" Mrs. Sullivan asked. "Tuesday's stage if all goes well. I thought perhaps the riding clothes could be ready first and the rest can follow." "That's quite reasonable," Lydia agreed. "I can have something suitable prepared by Wednesday." Lucas smiled, the expression reaching his eyes and crinkling the corners. "Much obliged, Miss Collins. I'm certain Elizabeth will appreciate having another educated Eastern lady to talk to out here. Gets lonely for female company at the ranch." After he left, Mrs. Sullivan gave Lydia a knowing look. "Lucas Dawson is quite a catch, you know. Owns the largest cattle ranch in the county and not hard on the eyes either. Half the unmarried ladies in town have set their caps for him, but he's never shown much interest." "I'm not interested in catching anyone," Lydia said firmly, returning to her embroidery. "I came west to be independent, not to find a husband." Mrs. Sullivan chuckled. "Of course, dear, just making conversation." Her expression turned more serious. "Though a woman alone has a hard road out here. Something to consider." Lydia said nothing, but her thoughts were in turmoil. She had escaped one marriage, fled across half a continent to avoid Harold's increasingly violent outbursts and possessive rage. The last thing she wanted was another man controlling her life, no matter how kind his manner or how blue his eyes. That evening, Lydia selected materials for Elizabeth Dawson's new wardrobe. For the riding clothes, she chose a sturdy denim fabric and a practical brown wool. For the day dresses, several cotton prints in colors that would complement the earthy tones of the prairie. She worked late into the night, cutting patterns and basting seams. The work was a welcome distraction from her thoughts, which kept returning to Lucas Dawson despite her best efforts. There was something about him that unsettled her, not in the frightening way Harold had, but in a manner that made her question her resolve to remain alone and unattached. Tuesday arrived, and with it, the completion of Elizabeth Dawson's riding outfit. Lydia had worked extra hours to ensure it would be ready when promised, taking particular care with the split-skirt design that would allow for comfortable horseback riding while maintaining a lady's modesty. She was just putting the finishing touches on the jacket when the shop bell rang. Expecting Mrs. Sullivan, who had stepped out to purchase more thread, Lydia called, "I'll be right with you." "No hurry, Miss Collins." The voice froze her in place. Not Lucas Dawson's warm baritone, but a cultured Eastern accent she knew all too well. Slowly, she raised her head to see Harold Carter standing in the doorway, impeccably dressed in a fine suit that looked absurdly out of place in the frontier town. "You've led me on quite a chase, Lucinda," he said. his tone pleasant but his eyes cold with fury. "Did you really think you could disappear? That I wouldn't find you?" Lydia's heart hammered against her ribs. "How did you find me?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Money opens many doors, and you were careless." He stepped further into the shop, closing the door behind him. "Using your mother's maiden name, taking the most direct route west. Really, my dear, I expected more creativity from you." She backed away as he advanced, her hand fumbling for the scissors on the work table. "I'm not going back with you, Harold." "Oh, I think you will." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "You're my wife, Lucinda. Your place is by my side, and after the humiliation you've caused me, you have much to atone for." "I've filed for divorce," she said, her voice stronger now as her fingers closed around the scissors. "The papers were served before I left." "You no longer have any claim to me." His face darkened. "A divorce? You dare to disgrace me further?" He lunged forward suddenly, grabbing her wrist and twisting until she dropped the scissors. "You belong to me. You swore before God to obey me, and I will not be made a laughingstock by a disobedient wife." The bell above the door jingled again, and Harold released her abruptly, stepping back with practiced composure. "Miss Collins, I've brought—" Lucas Dawson stopped mid-sentence. Taking in the scene before him, Lydia backed against the table, face pale with fear, and the well-dressed stranger standing too close to her. "Forgive me," Lucas said slowly, his eyes narrowing as they moved from Harold to Lydia. "I didn't realize you had a customer." "I'm not a customer," Harold said smoothly, extending his hand. "Harold Carter of Philadelphia. I've come to retrieve my wife." Lucas didn't take the offered hand. Instead, he moved further into the shop, positioning himself subtly between Harold and Lydia. "Your wife? Yes. My Lucinda has had a bit of a nervous episode. Family tragedy, you understand. She's not been herself." Harold's voice dripped with concern, but his eyes remained cold. "I've come to take her home where she can receive proper care." "That's so." Lucas turned to Lydia. "Miss Collins? Or is it Mrs. Carter?" Lydia's heart pounded in her ears. The truth would have to come out now, her deception, her flight, everything. But as she looked at Lucas's steady gaze, she found herself unable to lie to him any longer. "My name was Lucinda Carter," she admitted. "But I left Philadelphia to escape my husband after he nearly killed me in one of his rages. I've filed for divorce. He has no right to be here." Harold's facade of civility cracked. "You ungrateful little, I think you'd better leave," Lucas interrupted, his voice deceptively calm but with an edge of steel beneath. "This is none of your concern, Cowboy," Harold sneered. "This is between me and my wife. In Hayes City, a lady's distress is every man's concern." Lucas hadn't raised his voice, but something in his posture had changed. "Now, you can walk out that door of your own accord, or I can have the marshal escort you to the jail. Your choice." Harold's face flushed with anger, but he was intelligent enough to recognize when he was outmatched. "This isn't over, Lucinda. I'll be at the hotel. When you've come to your senses, you know where to find me." After he stormed out, Lydia's legs gave way and she sank onto a nearby chair, trembling. "Are you all right?" Lucas asked, his voice gentler now. "Did he hurt you?" She shook her head. "No, not today." Almost unconsciously, her hand went to her throat where scars from Harold's last attack were hidden beneath her high collar. Lucas's eyes followed the movement, understanding darkening his gaze. "I see." He pulled up a chair, sitting across from her rather than looming over her. "Would you like to tell me the truth now, Miss Collins? Or should I call you Mrs. Carter?" "Please, not that name," she whispered. "I never want to hear it again." "All right, then." He waited, patient and still, giving her the space to find her words. Slowly, haltingly, Lydia told him everything. How her father had arranged her marriage to his business associate when she was just 18, after her mother's death left her without protection. How Harold's charming public persona hid a private jealousy and cruelty that had grown worse over their 3 years of marriage. How his last attack had left her unconscious, with marks on her throat from where he tried to strangle her. "I knew then that if I stayed, he would eventually kill me," she said, her voice steadying as she spoke. "So when he left for a business trip, I took what money I could access from my personal account, filed divorce papers with my father's former law partner, and fled west. I chose Lydia Collins because Lydia was my mother's name, and Collins was her maiden name." Lucas listened without interruption, his expression grave. When she finished, he nodded slowly. "Thank you for trusting me with the truth." Before she could respond, Mrs. Sullivan bustled in, stopping short when she saw them. "Oh, I didn't expect you, Mr. Dawson. Is everything all right?" "Miss Collins, you look pale as a ghost." "I'm fine," Lydia assured her, though her voice trembled slightly. "Just a bit tired from rushing to finish the riding outfit." Lucas stood. "Miss Collins has done a remarkable job with my sister's clothes. I came to see if anything was ready yet, as Elizabeth arrived on today's stage." The casual way he covered for her emotional state made Lydia's heart swell with gratitude. She stood, retrieving the completed riding outfit from her workbench. "This is finished. The day dresses will be ready by the weekend." "Perfect. Elizabeth will be delighted." He accepted the wrapped package, then fixed Lydia with a meaningful look. "Will you be attending the social at the mayor's house this Saturday?" The unexpected question threw her. I hadn't planned to." "I think you should consider it. It would be good for you to meet more of the townsfolk." There was something in his expression that conveyed more than his casual words, a promise of protection. Perhaps I will," she said quietly. After Lucas left, Mrs. Sullivan raised an eyebrow. "What was that about? Mr. Dawson doesn't usually attend social gatherings unless absolutely necessary." "I'm not sure," Lydia answered honestly, though she suspected Lucas wanted to ensure she had people around her safety in numbers against whatever Harold might attempt. That night, Lydia barely slept, starting at every sound outside her window, imagining Harold breaking in to drag her back to Philadelphia. By morning, dark circles shadowed her eyes, but she was determined not to let fear rule her again. When she descended to open the shop, she found Marshall Tate having coffee with Mrs. Sullivan in the back room. "Morning, Miss Collins," the marshal greeted her. "Just having a word with Mrs. Sullivan about keeping an eye out for strangers in town. Had a report of an unsavory character asking questions about you yesterday." Lydia's stomach clenched. "Did Mr. Dawson speak with you?" "He did. Mentioned your ex-husband might be causing trouble." "Don't you worry, miss. We take care of our own in Hayes City." The simple declaration that she was now considered one of their own brought unexpected tears to Lydia's eyes. She had been in town barely 2 weeks, yet already these people were rallying to protect her. "Thank you," she managed, quickly wiping her eyes. "I appreciate that more than I can say." Over the next few days, Lydia noticed subtle changes in the town's behavior toward her. The banker's wife made a point of stopping by to invite her personally to the social. The blacksmith's son took to walking past the shop several times a day, tipping his hat to her. Even the stern Mrs. Blackburn from the hotel sent word that if that Eastern fellow caused any trouble, her shotgun was loaded and ready. Harold, for his part, seemed to be biding his time. She caught glimpses of him watching the shop from across the street, his presence a constant reminder that her newfound peace was fragile. By Saturday, Lydia had completed Elizabeth Dawson's day dresses and was putting the finishing touches on a sky-blue gown for herself to wear to the social. She had decided to attend, partly because Lucas had suggested it, but also because she refused to hide away in fear. As she dressed for the evening, Lydia studied her reflection. The blue gown was simpler than anything she would have worn in Philadelphia, but the color brought out the auburn highlights in her hair and made her eyes appear more green than brown. For the first time since arriving in Hayes City, she wore her hair looser, with soft curls framing her face. Mrs. Sullivan appeared in the doorway, her eyes widening. "My goodness, you look beautiful. I knew you had good bones under all that severity, but look at you." Lydia blushed. "Do you think it's too much? I don't want to appear forward." "Nonsense, it's perfect for a social. And if it happens to catch the eye of a certain rancher, well, that's just a happy coincidence, isn't it?" The mayor's house was the largest in Hayes City, though it would have been considered modest in Philadelphia society. Lanterns hung from the porch and lined the walkway, casting a warm glow over arriving guests. Inside, the furniture had been pushed back to create space for dancing, and a small ensemble of local musicians played in one corner. Lydia entered with Mrs. Sullivan, immediately conscious of eyes turning toward her. She kept her own gaze moving, scanning the room for any sign of Harold while trying to appear casual. "Miss Collins," the mayor's wife approached, beaming. "How delightful that you could join us. You must meet everyone." For the next half hour, Lydia was introduced to what seemed like the entire population of Hayes City. She smiled and nodded, trying to remember names and connections, all while maintaining a vigilant awareness of her surroundings. She was just beginning to relax when Lucas Dawson entered with a young woman who could only be his sister. Elizabeth Dawson was wearing the riding outfit Lydia had made, though she had paired it with an elegant blouse that softened the practical garment for evening wear. Lucas spotted Lydia immediately, his eyes warming as he guided his sister through the crowd toward her. "Miss Collins," he greeted her, "I'd like you to meet my sister, Elizabeth. Elizabeth, this is Miss Lydia Collins, the talented seamstress I told you about." Elizabeth Dawson was a handsome woman in her late 20s, with the same striking blue eyes as her brother but lighter hair. "Miss Collins, I'm delighted to meet you. This outfit is marvelous. I've never had riding clothes that fit so well." "I'm pleased you like it," Lydia said, genuine pride warming her voice. "The day dresses should be ready by Tuesday." "Wonderful, I can't wait. Lucas tells me you're from the East as well. I spent 10 years in St. Louis myself. I miss certain aspects of city life, but there's something about the openness out here that feeds the soul, don't you think?" Before Lydia could respond, a commotion at the entrance drew everyone's attention. Harold Carter stood in the doorway, immaculately dressed and radiating the confident charm that had once fooled Philadelphia society. "Forgive my intrusion," he announced to the startled gathering. "I'm searching for my wife." Lucas moved subtly closer to Lydia, his shoulder almost touching hers. "Trouble," he murmured. The mayor approached Harold, his expression cautious. "Sir, this is a private gathering. I don't believe we've been introduced." Harold Carter of Carter Shipping in Philadelphia. He extended his hand with practiced ease. "I apologize for the interruption, but my wife has been unwell. She's fled her treatment and I've traced her here." Murmurs spread through the room as people turned to look at Lydia. She felt her face flush with shame and anger. "He's lying," she said, her voice carrying in the sudden quiet. "I left Philadelphia because this man nearly killed me. I have filed for divorce, and he has no right to call me his wife." Harold's charming facade cracked for a moment, rage flashing across his features before he controlled it. "You see, delusions. The doctors warned me this might happen." "Lucinda, darling, no one is trying to hurt you. You need help." "The lady's name is Lydia Collins," Lucas said calmly, stepping forward, "and she's made it clear she doesn't wish to speak with you. I think you should leave." Harold's eyes narrowed. "And who are you to interfere between a man and his wife?" This is a private matter. Not in my house, it isn't, the mayor declared, moving to stand beside Lucas. Marshal Tate is right outside, Mr. Carter. I suggest you leave peacefully before I call him in. As if on cue, Marshal Tate appeared in the doorway behind Harold, his hand resting casually on his holstered pistol. Is there a problem here, Mayor? Harold glanced between the marshal, the mayor, and Lucas, clearly calculating his odds. The room had shifted, the townspeople moving closer to Lydia in a subtle display of solidarity that brought tears to her eyes. This isn't over, Harold said, his voice low enough that only those closest could hear. I won't be humiliated by a hysterical woman in a town full of frontier barbarians. He turned on his heel and stormed out, shoving past the marshal, who watched him go with a measuring look before nodding reassuringly to Lydia. The party resumed slowly, the music starting again, though the mood had changed. Lydia found herself surrounded by supportive women offering encouragement and men assuring her that Harold Carter wouldn't trouble her again if they had anything to say about it. Are you all right? Lucas asked quietly when they had a moment alone near the refreshment table. I don't know, she admitted. He won't give up easily. Harold doesn't lose ever. He's never been to the frontier before, Lucas pointed out. The rules are different here. Elizabeth joined them, offering Lydia a cup of punch. My brother tells me you've had some trouble with your former husband. I hope you don't mind him sharing your circumstances with me. No, of course not, Lydia said, finding that she truly didn't mind. Your brother has been very kind. Elizabeth smiled. Lucas has always had a soft spot for those in need of protection. Our mother used to say he was born 100 years too late, should have been a knight in shining armor. Lucas rolled his eyes good-naturedly. Lizzie, please don't embarrass me in front of Miss Collins. Oh, I'm just getting started, Elizabeth teased. Wait until I tell her about the time you tried to rescue Mrs. Henderson's cat from the roof and ended up needing rescue yourself. Despite everything, Lydia found herself laughing at the siblings' easy banter. It reminded her of happier times with her own family before her mother's death, and her father's financial troubles had changed everything. As the evening progressed, Lydia began to relax again. The dancing started, and she was surprised to find herself in demand as a partner. She danced with the mayor, the banker, and several young cowboys, each making a point of treating her with exaggerated courtesy, a clear message to anyone watching that Lydia Collins was under the town's protection. When Lucas finally approached her for a dance, Lydia felt an unexpected flutter of anticipation. I was beginning to think you didn't dance, Mr. Dawson, she said as he led her onto the floor. Only when the partner is worth the effort, he replied, his hand warm at her waist as they moved into a waltz. You dance well. Part of a proper Eastern education, she said, trying to ignore the way her pulse quickened at his touch. Though I suspect you didn't learn this on a cattle ranch. He smiled. My mother insisted we both learn, said even cowboys should know how to behave in civilized company. They moved together with surprising ease, as if they had danced many times before. Lydia was acutely aware of his strength, the careful way he guided her through the steps without controlling her movements. I want to thank you, she said quietly, for standing up for me tonight, for believing me. His expression turned serious. You don't need to thank me for that. No one deserves to live in fear, especially not of someone who promised to cherish them. The simple statement, delivered without drama or expectation, touched something deep within her. For 3 years, Harold had convinced her that his violence was her fault, that if she were a better wife, he wouldn't be driven to such extremes. Lucas's matter-of-fact rejection of that premise was like cool water on a burn she hadn't realized was still raw. Still, she said, You took my word over his, even knowing I'd been living under a false name." "I've met men like him before," Lucas said, his voice hardening slightly. "Men who believe ownership is the same as love. I recognized the type the moment he walked into the shop." His expression softened. "Besides, I'd already seen enough of your character to know you weren't a woman who would lie without good reason." The music ended, and they stood for a moment, still close, before Lydia reluctantly stepped back. "I should check on Mrs. Sullivan. She mentioned her feet were bothering her earlier." Lucas nodded, releasing her hand with what seemed like similar reluctance. "Of course, but save another dance for me later. I'd like that," she admitted. The remainder of the evening passed pleasantly, though Lydia couldn't help glancing toward the door occasionally, half expecting Harold to return. He didn't, and by the time she and Mrs. Sullivan were ready to leave, she had almost managed to forget the confrontation. Lucas and Elizabeth insisted on escorting them back to the shop, despite Mrs. Sullivan's protests that it was only 3 blocks. "I'll feel better knowing you're safely home," Lucas said simply. They walked through the quiet streets, the night air cool after the warmth of the crowded party. Elizabeth and Mrs. Sullivan walked ahead, deep in conversation about the latest fashions from St. Louis, while Lucas and Lydia followed at a more leisurely pace. "Will you be all right?" Lucas asked quietly. "After tonight, he knows the town supports you, but that might make him more desperate." Lydia nodded. "I've lived with fear for 3 years, Mr. Dawson. At least now it's in the open, not hiding in my own home." They reached the shop, and Mrs. Sullivan unlocked the door, bidding Elizabeth and Lucas good night before heading upstairs. Elizabeth followed, saying she needed to discuss the details of her new dresses with Lydia in the morning. Lucas lingered on the porch, his expression thoughtful in the moonlight. "I meant what I said before, Miss Collins. You're not alone in this. The people of Hayes City take care of their own." "I'm beginning to believe that," she said softly. "It's a strange feeling, having people stand with me instead of judging me." He took her hand then, his touch gentle. "When I first saw you step off that stage, something about you called to me. I couldn't name it then, but I think I understand now. You have courage, Lydia Collins, or whatever name you choose to use. The kind of courage that doesn't shout or boast but simply endures." The use of her first name should have seemed forward, but instead it felt right, as if they had moved beyond formalities. "Thank you, Lucas, for seeing me." He raised her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Good night, Lydia. Sleep well." As she watched him walk away, Lydia touched her hand where his lips had brushed it, a warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with fear or shame. For the first time in years, she felt the stirring of something like hope. The next morning, Lydia woke to the sound of raised voices from downstairs. Dressing quickly, she hurried down to find Mrs. Sullivan arguing with Harold at the shop door, which she had firmly wedged half-closed. "I don't care who you are in Philadelphia," Mrs. Sullivan was saying, her normally pleasant voice sharp with anger. "This is my establishment, and I say you're not welcome here." "This is ridiculous," Harold snapped. "I merely wish to speak with my wife. You have no right to interfere." Lydia steeled herself and moved forward. "It's all right, Mrs. Sullivan, I'll speak with him." Mrs. Sullivan turned, concern etched on her face. "Are you sure, dear? I can send the boy for Marshal Tate." "No need," Lydia assured her, though her heart was racing. "Mr. Carter is leaving on the morning stage, aren't you, Harold?" His eyes narrowed. "We need to talk privately, Lucinda." "Anything you have to say can be said in front of Mrs. Sullivan," Lydia replied firmly. "And my name is Lydia now." Harold's jaw clenched, but he seemed to realize causing a scene would not serve his purpose. "Very well. I've received word from Philadelphia. Your father has suffered a stroke. The doctors don't expect him to recover." The news hit Lydia like a physical blow. Despite their strained relationship in recent years, she loved her father. Is he asking for me? He's unable to speak, Harold said, a flicker of what might have been genuine sympathy crossing his face. But I'm certain he would want you by his side at such a time. We can leave on today's stage. Lydia studied him, searching for signs of deception. Harold was manipulative, but even he wouldn't lie about something so serious, would he? I need to verify this. By all means, Harold said smoothly, producing a telegram from his pocket. Here's the message from Dr. Monroe. You remember him, I'm sure. The telegram was brief, but clear. Jonathan Collins had indeed suffered a severe stroke and was not expected to recover. The doctor urged Harold to bring Lucinda home as quickly as possible. I need time to think, Lydia said, her mind reeling. There isn't time, Harold insisted. The stage leaves at noon. Then it will leave without me, she replied, finding her resolve again. If I decide to return to Philadelphia, it will be on my own terms, not yours. Harold's facade of concern vanished. You've always been selfish, Lucinda. Even now, you think only of yourself while your father lies dying. The accusation stung, partly because it played on Lydia's deepest fears that in fleeing Harold, she had abandoned her responsibilities to her father, who had been increasingly frail when she left. Get out, she whispered, her voice shaking. Get out now. Something in her tone must have warned him not to push further. Harold backed away, his expression cold. The stage leaves at noon. I'll save you a seat, but I won't wait another day. Think carefully about what matters more, your foolish pride or your father's last moments, after he left, Mrs. Sullivan put a comforting arm around Lydia's shoulders. Oh, my dear, what will you do? I don't know, Lydia admitted. If my father is truly dying, I should be there, but traveling with Harold. Perhaps someone else could accompany you, Mrs. Sullivan suggested, for protection. Before Lydia could respond, the bell above the door chimed again, and Elizabeth Dawson entered, her face brightening when she saw Lydia. Good morning. I hope I'm not too early. I couldn't wait to see the dresses you've been working on. Lydia tried to compose herself, but Elizabeth's keen eyes noticed her distress immediately. What's wrong? Has something happened? Haltingly, Lydia explained the situation. Elizabeth listened with growing concern, then nodded decisively. You can't travel with that man alone. It's too dangerous. I may not have a choice, Lydia said. The stage leaves at noon. Nonsense. There's always a choice. Elizabeth paced the small shop, thinking, Lucas and I could accompany you. What? No, I couldn't possibly ask that of you. You're not asking, I'm offering, Elizabeth said firmly. Lucas has business interests in St. Louis he's been meaning to attend to. We could travel that far with you, at least. And from there, perhaps I could continue on to Philadelphia with you while Lucas concludes his business. Lydia was stunned by the generosity of the offer. But we barely know each other. Elizabeth smiled, taking Lydia's hands in hers. My brother speaks very highly of you, and I've learned to trust his judgment of character. Besides, what kind of Christian would I be if I left a fellow woman in distress? I don't know what to say. Say yes, Elizabeth urged. Let me speak with Lucas. He'll arrange everything. True to her word, Elizabeth returned within the hour with Lucas, who listened gravely to Lydia's situation before nodding. We can be ready by noon. I'll book passage for all of us. But what about Harold? Lydia asked. He expects me to travel with him. Let me worry about Mr. Carter, Lucas said, a determined glint in his eye. You focus on packing what you need for the journey. Lydia spent the next hours in a whirlwind of activity, packing her meager belongings and explaining to Mrs. Sullivan that she didn't know when or if she would return. Your position will be waiting for you, Mrs. Sullivan assured her, pressing a small package into her hands. This is the money you've earned, plus a bit extra. Don't argue you've more than earned it with your fine work. And this is your home now, whenever you choose to return." By 11:30, Lydia was ready, her carpetbag packed with her clothes and the few possessions she had accumulated during her time in Hayes City. Lucas arrived with a wagon to transport them to the stage depot, Elizabeth beside him. "Any sign of Harold?" Lydia asked anxiously as Lucas helped her into the wagon. "He's at the depot already, looking quite smug," Lucas replied. "Don't worry. I've spoken with the stage driver. He knows the situation." When they arrived at the depot, Harold was indeed waiting, his luggage stacked neatly beside him. His expression darkened when he saw Lydia arrive with the Dawsons. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, approaching the wagon. "Lucinda, our seats are booked. There's no need for escorts." "I'm traveling with friends," Lydia replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "If you wish to return to Philadelphia, you're welcome to take the stage, but I won't be sitting with you." Harold's face flushed with anger. "This is absurd. I've paid for your ticket." "And I've returned the money to the clerk," Lucas said calmly, stepping between them. "Miss Collins has her own ticket now." For a moment, Lydia thought Harold might physically attack Lucas. His hands clenched into fists and a vein pulsed visibly at his temple. Then, with visible effort, he controlled himself. "Fine. Play your games. But remember, Lucinda, in Philadelphia, your frontier friends won't be there to protect you." The stage arrived, dust billowing around the 6-horse team as they came to a stop before the depot. Passengers disembarked, stretching cramped limbs, and the driver called for new passengers to board. To Lydia's surprise, Marshal Tate appeared, speaking briefly with the driver before approaching their group. "Morning, folks. Just making sure everyone has a pleasant journey." His pointed look at Harold made it clear whom the warning was for. They boarded, Lydia sitting between Elizabeth and Lucas while Harold took a seat across from them, his expression stormy. 6 other passengers filled the remaining seats, making for a cramped journey. As the stage pulled away from Hayes City, Lydia looked back at the town that had briefly been her sanctuary. Would she ever see it again? Or was she traveling back into the cage she had so desperately escaped? Lucas seemed to sense her thoughts. "Remember," he said quietly, "you're not alone anymore." The journey east was long and arduous, the stage stopping only briefly at way stations for meals and to change horses. Harold maintained a cold silence, watching Lydia with calculating eyes that made her skin crawl. When they stopped at night, Elizabeth remained constantly at Lydia's side, while Lucas ensured their rooms were secure. By the 3rd day, they reached the railway at Topeka, where they transferred to a train bound for St. Louis. The greater comfort of rail travel was a relief after the jolting stage, though the tension between their small group and Harold remained palpable. "What will you do when we reach Philadelphia?" Elizabeth asked quietly as they sat together in the train's dining car, Lucas having insisted on remaining with their luggage to prevent Harold from tampering with it. Lydia sighed, watching the Kansas landscape roll past the window. "See my father if he still lives. Beyond that, I don't know. The divorce proceedings will take time, and Harold has influence in Philadelphia society. It won't be easy. Will you return to Hayes City afterward?" There was a hesitancy in Elizabeth's question that made Lydia look at her more closely. "I'd like to," Lydia admitted. "I felt free there in a way I never have before, but it depends on many things." Elizabeth nodded, understanding in her eyes. "My brother would want you to come back. He's never shown such interest in a woman before." Lydia felt her cheeks warm. "We've barely known each other 2 weeks." "Sometimes that's all it takes," Elizabeth said softly. "When I met my late husband, I knew within days that he was the one for me. We had 5 wonderful years before the influenza took him." Her eyes grew distant with memory. When you find someone who sees you, truly sees you, time becomes irrelevant. The idea that Lucas might see her in such a way was both thrilling and terrifying. After Harold's possessive love, could she trust her own judgment about a man's intentions? Yet Lucas had never made her feel afraid or small. Quite the opposite, in his presence she felt stronger, more capable. "I don't know if I'm ready for that," Lydia confessed. "After Harold." "Of course," Elizabeth squeezed her hand, "and Lucas would never push. He's patient to a fault, drives me mad sometimes with his deliberate way of doing things. But when he does commit, it's completely." The train arrived in St. Louis 2 days later. Harold, who had been growing increasingly agitated as they traveled farther east, confronted them at the station. "This charade has gone on long enough," he said, his voice low but intense. "Lucinda, you're my wife. These people have no right to interfere in our affairs. Come with me now and I'll forgive your indiscretion." Lucas stepped forward, his expression hard. "Mr. Carter, Miss Collins has made her wishes clear. She will continue to Philadelphia with Elizabeth while I attend to my business here. Any attempt to interfere will result in charges of harassment." Harold's eyes narrowed. "You think the law will side with you over me? Do you have any idea who I am in Philadelphia?" "I don't much care who you are," Lucas replied evenly. "Out here, a man is judged by his actions, not his name or his bank account." For a tense moment, the two men stared at each other, neither willing to back down. Finally, Harold turned to Lydia. "This isn't over," he said quietly. "When you come to your senses, you know where to find me." With that, he stalked away, disappearing into the crowd. "You think he's given up?" Lydia asked, watching his retreating form. "No," Lucas said grimly. "He's planning something. We need to be careful." They secured rooms at a respectable hotel near the station, and Lucas went to attend to his business dealings while Elizabeth and Lydia rested from the journey. The next morning, they were scheduled to board the train for Chicago, the next leg of their journey to Philadelphia. That evening, Lucas returned to the hotel with a troubled expression. "I've received a telegram from Philadelphia," he told them. "I took the liberty of contacting Dr. Monroe to verify your father's condition." Lydia's heart raced. "And your father did suffer a stroke, but it wasn't as severe as Carter implied. He's conscious and recovering, though slowly. And he's been asking for you." Relief washed over Lydia, followed quickly by anger. "Harold exaggerated to manipulate me into returning with him." "It appears so," Lucas agreed. "But the doctor did suggest that seeing you would aid your father's recovery. He's been quite distressed since learning of your departure." Lydia felt a pang of guilt. She had left without explaining fully to her father why she was going, fearing he would try to reconcile her with Harold. "Then I should continue to Philadelphia," she decided. "But not with Harold. I won't let him use my father to control me again." That night, as Lydia prepared for bed in the room she shared with Elizabeth, a knock came at their door. Elizabeth answered cautiously, then stepped back to admit Lucas. "I've been thinking," he said without preamble. "I should continue with you to Philadelphia." Elizabeth raised her eyebrows. "What about your business here? It can wait." Lucas turned to Lydia. "I don't trust Carter. He's desperate, and desperate men are dangerous. I'd feel better if I accompanied you." The offer touched Lydia deeply. "I can't ask you to do that. You've already done so much." "You're not asking." "I'm offering," Lucas said, echoing his sister's words from days earlier. "Besides, I've never seen Philadelphia. Might be educational." Despite her concerns, Lydia found herself smiling at his attempt at lightness. "It's a very different world from Hayes City, so I gather." "All the more reason to have a friend with you." The word friend seemed inadequate for what Lucas had become to her in such a short time, but Lydia nodded. "Thank you. I would feel safer with you there." They left for Philadelphia the next morning, taking the train to Chicago and then east. Harold was nowhere to be seen, which worried Lydia more than if he had been openly following them. What was he planning? The journey gave them time to talk, to learn more about each other beyond the crisis that had brought them together. Lydia found herself drawn to Lucas's quiet strength, his thoughtful observations about the changing landscape as they traveled, and his genuine interest in her thoughts and feelings. By the time they reached Philadelphia 4 days later, Lydia felt as though she had known Lucas and Elizabeth for years rather than weeks. They had shared meals, conversations, and the close quarters of train travel, developing a comfortable rhythm together that felt surprisingly natural. Philadelphia greeted them with gray skies and drizzling rain, the air heavy with coal smoke and the smells of the city. After the open spaces of Kansas, Lydia found the crowded streets oppressive, though they held the familiarity of home. They took a carriage to her father's house in the fashionable Rittenhouse Square neighborhood, Lydia growing increasingly tense as they approached. What would her father say when she arrived with strangers? How would he react to her flight, her divorce petition, her rejection of the match he had arranged? The house was as she remembered, a handsome brownstone with white trim and carefully tended window boxes, though the flowers looked somewhat neglected now. A maid answered their knock, her eyes widening in recognition. "Miss Lucinda. Oh, thank goodness you've come. The master has been asking for you daily." "Hello, Mary. How is he?" Lydia asked, removing her gloves as they entered the familiar foyer. "Better this past week. The doctor says having something to hope for has given him strength." Mary eyed Lucas and Elizabeth curiously. "Shall I announce your friends?" "Yes, please. This is Mr. Lucas Dawson and his sister, Miss Elizabeth Dawson. They've been kind enough to accompany me from Kansas." Mary showed them to the parlor while she went to inform Mr. Collins of their arrival. Lydia watched Lucas taking in the formal furnishings, the oil paintings, the crystal chandelier, all the trappings of Eastern wealth that must seem excessive after the simplicity of frontier life. "It's a beautiful home," Elizabeth offered, touching the velvet draperies admiringly. "It was once," Lydia said softly, "before my mother died. After that it became more of a showpiece. My father entertained business associates here, but it stopped feeling like home." Lucas was studying a family portrait above the fireplace, Lydia as a young girl, seated between her parents. "You have your mother's smile," he observed. Before Lydia could respond, the door opened, and Mary returned. "The master will see you now." "He's in his study. He insisted on getting up from his sick when he heard you were here." Lydia led the way to her father's study, her heart pounding. The room was dimly lit, heavy curtains drawn against the gray day outside. Jonathan Collins sat in a wing chair by the cold fireplace, a blanket over his knees despite the warm June day. His once robust frame had diminished, and his left side drooped slightly, evidence of the stroke's effects. "Father," Lydia said softly, crossing to kneel beside his chair. His right hand reached for hers, his grip surprisingly strong. "Lucinda," he said, his speech slurred but understandable. "My girl, you came home." "Of course I did," she said, tears filling her eyes. "I'm sorry I left the way I did." He shook his head slowly. "No, I'm sorry, Harold." He struggled to form the words. "I didn't know what he did to you." Lydia stared at him in shock. "You know about that," Jonathan nodded painfully. "After you left, his behavior, saw it myself, should have protected you." A sob escaped her. All this time, she had believed her father either didn't know or didn't care about Harold's abuse. To hear him acknowledge it now was both validating and heartbreaking. "Father, these are my friends from Kansas," she said, gesturing to Lucas and Elizabeth, who had remained respectfully near the door. "They helped me when Harold came looking for me." Jonathan's gaze shifted to them, and he beckoned them closer with his good hand. When Lucas approached, Jonathan studied him with unexpected intensity. "You protected her." "I tried to, sir," Lucas said simply. "Your daughter is quite capable of protecting herself, but I was honored to assist when needed." A faint smile touched Jonathan's face. "Good man." He turned back to Lydia. "Harold's been here, making demands, threatening legal action." "I've filed for divorce," Lydia told him. "I won't go back to him, father, not ever." "Good," Jonathan said, surprising her again. "Should never have pushed the match, thought he was respectable." Business acumen blinded me to his character. His speech was becoming more labored with emotion. "Forgive me, daughter." Lydia's tears flowed freely now. "There's nothing to forgive. We both thought he was different than he was." Mary appeared at the door. "The doctor says the master shouldn't overtire himself, Miss Lucinda. Perhaps you could continue your visit tomorrow." Jonathan gripped Lydia's hand tighter. "Stay in the house. Your old room. Friends, too. Plenty of space." "We wouldn't want to impose," Elizabeth began, but Jonathan cut her off with a wave of his hand. "Insist. Safer here. Harold has spies watching the hotels." That night, Lydia showed Lucas and Elizabeth to guest rooms in the spacious house, then retreated to her childhood bedroom. Everything was exactly as she had left it months earlier, the four-poster bed with its blue silk canopy, the silver brush set on the vanity, the watercolor she had painted as a girl still hanging on the walls. She sat at the window seat, looking out at the rain-slicked streets of Philadelphia, feeling strangely disconnected from the city she had once called home. Her thoughts kept returning to Hayes City, to the open skies and the simple rhythm of life there, to Mrs. Sullivan's shop and the people who had accepted her so quickly. A soft knock at her door roused her from her thoughts. She opened it to find Lucas standing there, looking somewhat out of place in the formal hallway. "I hope I'm not disturbing you," he said. "I wanted to make sure you were all right. It's been an emotional day." "I'm fine," she said, though the tremor in her voice betrayed her. "Just processing everything. My father's reaction wasn't what I expected." "He loves you," Lucas said simply. "That was clear from the moment we entered the room." "Yes, but—" Lydia hesitated, uncertain how to express the complex emotions swirling within her. "For years, I thought he valued the business connection with Harold more than my happiness. To learn now that he regrets the match, that he acknowledges what happened, it changes things." Lucas nodded, understanding in his eyes. "It gives you freedom to forge a new relationship with him without the past hanging between you." "Exactly." She looked up at him, struck again by how easily he seemed to understand her thoughts. "Would you like to come in? It's not proper, I know, but after everything we've been through." He smiled, that warm expression that reached his eyes and made her heart beat faster. "I think we're well past concerning ourselves with what's proper, Miss Collins." She led him to the sitting area by the window, taking the window seat while he sat in the upholstered chair across from her. For a moment, they were silent, the patter of rain against the glass the only sound. "What will you do now?" Lucas asked finally. "Will you stay in Philadelphia?" Lydia considered the question, one that had been weighing on her mind since they arrived. "I don't know. My father needs me at least until he's fully recovered, and the divorce proceedings will take time." She hesitated. "But I don't think Philadelphia is home anymore. Not really. And where is home?" His voice was soft, the question weighted with unspoken meaning. She met his gaze steadily. "I'm not sure yet, but I know it has wide skies and open spaces. And people who accept you for who you are, not what your name or your bank account says you should be." Lucas reached across the space between them, taking her hand in his. "When you figure it out, I hope you'll let me know." "You'll be the first," she promised, her fingers tightening around his. The next morning brought sunshine and a summons from Lydia's father. He was stronger today, sitting up in a proper chair in the morning room, a tray of barely touched breakfast beside him. "Lucinda," he greeted her, his voice clearer than the previous day. "And Mr. Dawson, good morning." "Good morning, Father. How are you feeling?" "Better for seeing you." He gestured to the chairs across from him. "Please sit. We have matters to discuss." Lydia glanced at Lucas, who had accompanied her at Jonathan's specific request. Elizabeth had chosen to remain in her room, claiming fatigue from the journey, though Lydia suspected she was giving them privacy. "Harold came by last evening," Jonathan said without preamble. "After you retired, he was agitated." Lydia tensed. "What did he want?" "The same thing he's wanted since you left your return." Jonathan's mouth tightened. "He threatened legal action against me for harboring you, claiming you're mentally unstable and in need of his protection." "That's absurd," Lucas said, his voice hard. "No court would support such claims." "In Philadelphia, with Carter's connections, I wouldn't be so certain." Jonathan sighed heavily. "But that's not all. He's blocking the divorce proceedings, and he's threatened to ruin what remains of my business if you don't return to him." Lydia felt cold dread settling in her stomach. "What are you saying, Father?" "I'm saying that Harold Carter is a dangerous man who will stop at nothing to get what he wants." Jonathan reached for her hand. "And what he wants is you, or rather, the control of you and through you, what remains of the Collins fortune." Lucas frowned. "I thought your father arranged the marriage for business reasons." "That was part of it," Lydia explained. "But I also inherited my mother's estate when I turned 21. It's held in trust until I'm 25 or—" She paused, realization dawning, "or until I have a child." Jonathan nodded gravely. "Harold was quite insistent on starting a family immediately after the wedding. Now we know why." "He wants control of my inheritance," Lydia said, the pieces falling into place. "That's why he's so determined to find me to bring me back." "It was never about love or even possession, it was about money all along." "Not entirely," Jonathan corrected. "Men like Carter value power above all else. The money is part of it, but the humiliation of having his wife flee him has wounded his pride. He wants to reassert his control." "What can we do?" Lucas asked, his expression grim. "Surely there must be legal protections." "There are, and I've set them in motion. My lawyer is preparing documents to transfer Lucinda's inheritance to a new trust that Carter cannot touch, even as her husband. But it will take time." Jonathan looked at his daughter sadly. "Time during which you won't be safe in Philadelphia." Lydia understood what he was suggesting. "You want me to leave again?" "Yes," Jonathan admitted, "at least until the legal matters are settled. Harold has too much influence here, too many people willing to do his bidding. I fear for your safety if you remain." "I won't leave you alone, not when you're still recovering," Lydia protested. "I won't be alone. I have loyal staff, my doctor and my lawyer, and I'm improving daily." Jonathan's gaze shifted to Lucas. "Would you take my daughter back to Kansas, Mr. Dawson? Keep her safe until I can resolve matters here." Lucas looked to Lydia, making it clear the decision was hers. "I would be honored to escort Miss Collins wherever she wishes to go, but it must be her choice." Lydia felt torn between her duty to her father and her instinct for self-preservation. "I don't want to run away again," she said finally. "Harold will just follow me as he did before." "Not if he believes you're still in Philadelphia," Jonathan said, a shrewd look crossing his features. "I have a plan, if you're willing to hear it." The plan was simple but clever. Jonathan would announce that Lydia had returned to Philadelphia to care for him during his illness, and that she was residing at the Collins home under the protection of her father and his lawyers. Meanwhile, one of the housemaids who resembled Lydia from a distance would be seen coming and going from the house, heavily veiled as if to avoid recognition. "Harold will focus his attention here," Jonathan explained. while you slip away quietly, taking a different route than before. Perhaps south to Baltimore, then west from there. It might work, Lucas said thoughtfully, especially if we leave separately. I can depart openly, returning to St. Louis on business as planned. Elizabeth can accompany me. Then Lydia can follow a few days later, meeting us in Baltimore. No, Lydia said firmly. I won't travel alone again. Harold has people watching the stations and coach depots. It's too risky. You wouldn't be alone, Jonathan said. Mary's husband works for the railroad. He can arrange private passage for you with a trusted conductor. And Mr. Dawson's sister could remain with you until you depart. They discussed the details late into the morning, refining the plan until all contingencies were covered. Elizabeth joined them, adding her own suggestions and agreeing to remain with Lydia while Lucas created the diversion of his departure. It's settled then, Jonathan said finally. Lucas and I will be seen publicly discussing business opportunities in St. Louis. He'll leave on tomorrow's afternoon train, making sure he's noticed. Lydia will remain secluded here with only Mary attending her, while Elizabeth keeps her company. Then, 3 days later, Lydia and Elizabeth will slip out through the service entrance after dark and take the late train to Baltimore. Lydia still felt uneasy about the separation, brief as it would be. Are you certain this is necessary? Perhaps if we confronted Harold directly with evidence of his abuse. It wouldn't matter, Jonathan said sadly. His reputation in society is impeccable. Without witnesses to the abuse, it would be your word against his. And as a husband, the law grants him certain rights over you. The harsh reality silenced her objections. As much as she hated to admit it, her father was right. In Philadelphia, Harold held all the advantages. Her only hope was to escape again, this time more carefully, and wait for the legal proceedings to provide the protection she needed. That evening, as Lydia prepared for bed, a soft knock came at her door. She opened it to find Elizabeth, dressed in her nightgown and wrapper. May I come in? I thought you might want some company. These old houses can be quite ghostly at night. Lydia welcomed her in, grateful for the companionship. They sat on the window seat, sharing the space as if they had been friends for years rather than weeks. Are you frightened? Elizabeth asked gently. About the plan, I mean. A little, Lydia admitted. Not of the journey itself, but of what happens after. Will I spend my whole life looking over my shoulder, wondering if Harold is just around the corner? No, Elizabeth said with surprising firmness. Eventually, the divorce will be granted. Your father will secure your inheritance. And Harold Carter will become nothing more than an unpleasant memory. You sound very certain. I am. Elizabeth smiled, her eyes twinkling. Besides, once you're back in Hayes City, you'll have the entire town watching out for you, and Lucas. Lydia felt her cheeks warm. Your brother has been very kind. Kind, Elizabeth laughed softly. Lydia, my brother traveled halfway across the country to protect a woman he barely knew. That's not kindness, that's something much deeper. We've only known each other a few weeks, Lydia protested weakly. Some connections don't need time, Elizabeth said, echoing her words from the train. They simply exist, recognizable from the first moment. Lydia thought of that first day in Hayes City, of Lucas's steady gaze that had seemed to see past her carefully constructed facade. Had something passed between them even then? Some recognition that she had been too afraid to acknowledge. I don't know if I'm ready for that, she said honestly. After Harold, no one's rushing you, Elizabeth assured her. Least of all Lucas. He's the most patient man I know. But when you are ready, if you decide that's what you want, I've never seen my brother look at anyone the way he looks at you. The next day passed in careful preparation. Lucas was seen with Jonathan at his club, discussing business loudly enough for several of Harold's acquaintances to overhear. They spoke of Lucas returning to St. Louis to arrange financing for a joint venture in cattle, shipping a plausible reason for his departure that would draw no suspicion. That afternoon, Lucas bid a public farewell to Jonathan on the front steps of the Collins home, where he was picked up by a hired carriage bound for the station. Harold's man, watching from across the street, followed the carriage exactly as they had hoped. What the watcher didn't see was the carriage stopping several blocks away, where Lucas exited through the far door and doubled back through side streets to the Collins home, entering through the servants' entrance. He took the bait, Lucas reported, joining Lydia, Elizabeth, and Jonathan in the study. Followed the carriage all the way to the station, where he'll see me board the St. Louis train, or rather, he'll see Wilson board it wearing my clothes and hat. Wilson was Jonathan's valet, similar in build to Lucas and willing to play his part in the deception. He would travel as far as Pittsburgh before returning to Philadelphia by a different route. "Excellent," Jonathan said. "Now, Lydia will remain secluded for 3 days. No one but Mary is to attend her, and the curtains in her room must remain drawn. Elizabeth will be seen coming and going normally, maintaining the appearance that she's waiting for Wilson's return from St. Louis before continuing her own journey." The plan was proceeding perfectly, perhaps too perfectly. Lydia found herself unable to shake a sense of foreboding as the day of her departure approached. She had escaped Harold once by luck and desperation. Could she really outmaneuver him a second time? On the afternoon before she was to leave, Mary hurried into her room, her face pale. "Miss Lucinda, Mr. Carter is downstairs, demanding to see you. Your father is trying to turn him away, but he's most insistent." Lydia's heart raced. "Did he see you come up here?" "No, miss." "I came up the back stairs." Mary wrung her hands anxiously. "What shall we do?" Lucas appeared in the doorway, having heard the commotion. "Stay here," he instructed quietly. "Both of you, I'll handle this." "No," Lydia caught his arm. "If Harold sees you, he'll know we deceived him. Our entire plan will be ruined." "I won't let him near you," Lucas said, his voice hard with determination. Before they could argue further, raised voices carried up from below. Harold's cultured tones had taken on an edge. Lydia recognized all too well the dangerous calm that preceded his worst violence. "This is your last warning, Jonathan. Produce Lucinda now, or I'll return with the police and a doctor's order to have her committed for her own protection. Your influence in this city isn't what it once was." "Get out of my house, Carter," Jonathan replied, his voice weaker but no less determined. "My daughter wants nothing to do with you, and neither do I. Your daughter is mentally unstable and legally my wife. Her wishes are irrelevant." Lydia couldn't bear it any longer. Her father was still recovering from a stroke. The stress of confronting Harold could cause a relapse. "I need to go down there," she whispered urgently to Lucas. "I can't let him threaten my father like this." Lucas shook his head. "That's exactly what he wants, to provoke you into showing yourself." "Then what do we do?" A crash from below made them all jump, the sound of breaking glass, followed by a thud and Jonathan's voice calling for help. Lucas moved with surprising speed for such a large man, brushing past Lydia and taking the stairs 2 at a time. She followed despite his instructions, fear for her father overriding caution. The scene in the entrance hall made her blood run cold. Jonathan had collapsed, his face ashen, while Harold stood over him with a broken vase in his hand. Whether he had struck Jonathan or the elder Collins had fallen from shock wasn't clear, but the result was the same. "Father!" Lydia cried, rushing forward. Harold's head snapped up, his expression shifting from rage to satisfaction when he saw her. "Lucinda! There you are! I was beginning to think your father was lying about your presence." Lucas positioned himself between Harold and Lydia as she knelt beside her father. "Mary, fetch the doctor," he ordered without taking his eyes off Harold. "Elizabeth, help Miss Collins with her father." Elizabeth appeared at Lydia's side, helping her lift Jonathan to a sitting position. The older man was conscious but dazed, blood trickling from a cut on his temple. "You'll pay for this, Carter," Lucas said, his voice deadly quiet. "Assaulting an invalid in his own home. Even your money won't protect you from those charges." Harold's composure slipped, revealing the rage beneath. "Who do you think you are, Cowboy? This is a family matter." "You have no place here. I'm exactly where I need to be." Lucas stood tall, his frontier-hardened frame making Harold look slight by comparison. "Now get out before I throw you out." For a tense moment, it seemed Harold might attack. Then the front door opened, and Marshal Jenkins, the local police officer, entered with Mary just behind him. "What's going on here?" the marshal demanded, taking in the scene with practiced eyes. "This man attacked my father," Lydia said, finding her voice. "He threatened both of us and refused to leave when asked." Harold's mask of civility returned instantly. "A misunderstanding, Marshal. I came to speak with my wife, who has been unwell. Her father became agitated and fell. I was trying to help him when these people interfered." "He's lying," Elizabeth said firmly. "We all heard him threatening Mr. Collins before the crash." The marshal looked between them, clearly unsure whom to believe. Harold Carter was a respected businessman. His word carried weight. "Marshal Jenkins," Jonathan said weakly, his voice slurring slightly from stress. "I want this man removed from my home and charged with assault. He struck me with that vase when I refused to force my daughter to see him." "That's a serious accusation, Mr. Collins," the marshal said, frowning. "Mr. Carter, do you have any witnesses to support your version of events?" Harold's confidence faltered slightly. "I don't need witnesses. I came to see my wife, as is my right." "Ex-wife," Lydia corrected, standing to face him. "The divorce petition has been filed, Harold." "And after this, I'll add assault charges to it," the marshal sighed. "Mr. Carter, I think it's best if you come with me to sort this out. Mr. Collins needs medical attention and emotions are running high." Harold's eyes burned with hatred as he looked at Lydia. "This isn't over," he said softly. "You belong to me, and I will have what's mine." After Harold was escorted out and the doctor had attended to Jonathan, confirming that he had suffered no serious injury beyond the cut and bruising, the family gathered in the study to reassess their plans. "He knows I'm here now," Lydia said, pacing anxiously, "and he'll be watching the house more closely than ever." "Which means we need to move up our timetable," Lucas decided. "You and Elizabeth should leave tonight, not tomorrow." Jonathan, resting on the sofa with a bandage on his temple, nodded weakly. "Lucas is right. Harold will likely be detained only briefly. Once he's released, he'll have men watching every exit. But the train tickets are for tomorrow night," Elizabeth pointed out. "And Mary's husband isn't working the late train tonight." "Then we'll take a different route," Lucas said, his mind working quickly. "A private carriage to the outskirts, then catch the westbound train at the next station. Harold will be watching the main Philadelphia station, not the smaller stops." "I can arrange a carriage," Jonathan offered. "My driver is trustworthy, and he knows the back roads well." The new plan was hastily assembled. Lydia and Elizabeth would leave within the hour, taking only what they could carry in small valises. Lucas would remain behind briefly to ensure they weren't followed, then take a different route to meet them in Pittsburgh, rather than Baltimore. As Lydia packed, her hands trembling slightly with urgency, she couldn't help feeling that they were running out of time. Harold's appearance had changed everything. His desperation was escalating, making him more dangerous than ever. "Are you ready?" Lucas asked from the doorway. He had changed from his city clothes into the more practical attire he had worn in Hayes City: sturdy trousers, a flannel shirt, and boots. A gun belt hung at his hip, something Lydia hadn't seen him wear in Philadelphia until now. Almost. She closed her valise, securing the clasp. "Lucas, I'm sorry about all this. You and Elizabeth have been drawn into my troubles, risking yourselves for me." He crossed the room in a few strides, taking her hands in his. "Stop that. We're here because we want to be, because you matter to us." His voice softened. "To me." Their eyes met, and Lydia felt the same connection that had sparked between them that first day in Hayes City, a recognition that went beyond words. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Lucas leaned down and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle, almost reverent, but it sent warmth coursing through Lydia's entire body. She had been kissed before by suitors before her marriage, by Harold in his more charming moments, but never like this. Never with this sense of being cherished rather than possessed. When they separated, Lucas touched her cheek softly. "I've wanted to do that since I first saw you on Main Street, looking lost but determined." "I wasn't lost," she protested with a small smile, "just finding my way, and have you found your way?" The question held more weight than its simple words suggested. Lydia thought of Hayes City, of the life she had begun to build there, of the woman she had started to become away from Harold's controlling influence. "I think I'm beginning to," she said honestly. A soft knock at the door signaled Elizabeth's arrival. "The carriage is ready," she said, her eyes widening slightly as she took in their close proximity. "Am I interrupting?" "No," Lydia said quickly, stepping back. "We're coming." The goodbye with her father was brief but emotional. Jonathan held her tightly with his good arm, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Be safe, my daughter. I'll resolve matters here as quickly as possible." "Take care of yourself," Lydia urged him. "Don't let Harold provoke you again." "I won't, and I'll have guards posted round the clock now." Jonathan shook Lucas's hand firmly. "Take care of her, Dawson." "With my life, sir," Lucas promised, and Lydia knew he meant it. They slipped out through the service entrance, where Jonathan's driver waited with a plain carriage, nothing like the elegant conveyance that had brought them from the station days earlier. This was deliberate. A nondescript vehicle would attract less attention. Lydia looked back at her childhood home as they pulled away, wondering if she would ever see it again. Despite the painful memories of her time with Harold, Philadelphia held the happier recollections of her youth, of her mother's love, and now of her reconciliation with her father. "We'll return when it's safe," Elizabeth said softly, seeming to read her thoughts. "When Harold has been dealt with legally." "Yes," Lydia agreed, though she wasn't certain she believed it. Something told her that her future lay westward, not in the city of her birth. The journey to the next station was tense, every passing carriage or rider causing them to duck down out of sight. But they reached it without incident, and the night train to Pittsburgh was blissfully uncrowded. As the train pulled away, carrying them westward into the darkness, Lydia felt the tension in her shoulders begin to ease. They had escaped again. And this time, she wasn't alone. Lucas met them in Pittsburgh 2 days later as promised. He had taken a roundabout route, changing trains twice to ensure he wasn't followed. The reunion at the station was joyful, Lucas lifting Elizabeth in a bear hug before turning to Lydia with a softer smile that made her heart race. "Any trouble?" he asked, taking their bags as they walked to the hotel where he had secured rooms. "None," Elizabeth reported, though Lydia has barely slept, jumping at every sound. "That will fade," Lucas assured her. "Once we're back in Hayes City, you'll feel safe again." The words warmed Lydia. Hayes City. Home. The concept was still strange to her that a place she had known for such a short time could feel more like home than the city where she had spent her entire life. They continued west by train, the journey smoother and faster than the stagecoach had been. Harold had not appeared again, and as the miles between them and Philadelphia increased, Lydia began to believe they might have truly escaped. A telegram caught up with them in St. Louis, a message from Jonathan relayed through his lawyer to avoid detection. Harold under investigation for financial irregularities. Evidence suggests embezzlement from Carter Shipping, staying with friends outside city for safety, proceed as planned, will write when safe. Financial irregularities, Lydia frowned. Harold was always meticulous with money. Perhaps not as meticulous as he appeared, Lucas suggested. Men like Carter often maintain their position through deception. If he's been embezzling from his own company, that would explain his desperation to control your inheritance. He might need it to cover his tracks. The revelation shifted Lydia's understanding of her marriage. Had Harold pursued her primarily for her money all along? The thought was both painful and freeing. Painful to think she had been valued only for her fortune, but freeing to know his obsession with her might have been practical rather than personal. The final leg of their journey took them back to Hayes City by stage, retracing the route Lydia had taken months earlier when she first arrived. As the familiar buildings of Main Street came into view, she felt a surge of emotion that took her by surprise. "Welcome back," Lucas said quietly, watching her face as she took in the sight of the town. "It feels different," she admitted. "Like I'm seeing it through new eyes." "You are," he said. "Your own eyes, not clouded by fear or uncertainty." Mrs. Sullivan was overjoyed to see Lydia, enveloping her in a warm hug the moment she stepped into the shop. "My dear girl, we've been so worried. Lucas's telegram said only that you had family business in the East. Is everything all right?" Lydia found herself telling Mrs. Sullivan everything about Harold, her escape, her father's stroke, and their narrow escape from Philadelphia. The older woman listened with growing indignation, her kind face hardening when Lydia described Harold's violence. "Well, he'll get no welcome in Hayes City if he dares show his face again," Mrs. Sullivan declared. "And your room is waiting for you exactly as you left it. I knew you'd come back." "How did you know?" Lydia asked, touched by the woman's faith in her return. Mrs. Sullivan smiled, glancing toward Lucas, who was carrying Lydia's bags upstairs. "Some things are just meant to be, dear. I could see it the moment you two were in a room together." Life in Hayes City resumed its rhythm, though with subtle differences. Lydia returned to work at the dress shop, but now she was welcomed as a friend returning home rather than a stranger seeking employment. The ladies who came for fittings asked about her journey east, and word of her dramatic escape from an abusive husband spread through the town, earning her sympathy and respect rather than the scandal such a revelation might have caused in Philadelphia. Lucas visited the shop frequently, sometimes with legitimate business. Elizabeth needed another dress, or one of his ranch hands was getting married and needed his future wife outfitted, but often simply to see Lydia. They would walk together in the evenings, talking about everything and nothing, their friendship deepening into something more with each passing day. A month after their return, a letter arrived from Jonathan. He had recovered enough to return to business, though with a more limited schedule. Harold was facing criminal charges for embezzlement, and the evidence was damning. The divorce proceedings were moving forward without opposition, as Harold's lawyers were too busy defending him against the financial crimes to contest it. "He writes that I should feel safe returning to Philadelphia if I wish," Lydia told Lucas as they sat on the porch of the Dawson ranch house one evening. Elizabeth had invited her for dinner, but had tactfully retired early, leaving them alone under the star-strewn Kansas sky. "And do you wish to return?" Lucas asked, his voice carefully neutral. Lydia considered the question, looking out at the vast prairie stretching before them, silvered by moonlight. "No," she said finally. "I miss my father and I'll visit him when the divorce is final, but my life is here now." Lucas's hand found hers in the darkness, his calloused fingers warm against her skin. "I'm glad to hear that. Are you?" She turned to look at him, finding his face solemn in the moonlight. "Very glad," he said softly. "Because I've been trying to find the right words to tell you that I love you, Lydia Collins. I think I have since that first day, when you stood on Main Street looking so determined to find your way." The declaration, simple and heartfelt, brought tears to Lydia's eyes. "Lucas." "You don't have to say anything," he assured her quickly. "I know it's soon, and after what you've been through, you might not be ready for." She stopped his words with a kiss, leaning across the space between their chairs to press her lips to his. He responded immediately, one hand coming up to cradle her face with exquisite gentleness. When they parted, Lydia rested her forehead against his. "I love you too," she whispered. "It terrifies me, but it's true. I've never felt with anyone what I feel when I'm with you." "What terrifies you?" he asked, stroking her cheek. "That I'll change, become like him." She shook her head. "No, I know you never would. What scares me is how much it would hurt to lose you now that I've found what love is supposed to be." "You won't lose me," Lucas promised. "Not willingly, not ever." 2 weeks later, a telegram arrived from Philadelphia. Harold Carter had been convicted of embezzlement and sentenced to 10 years in prison. The divorce had been granted in Lydia's favor, with a generous settlement that included the return of her entire inheritance, free from restrictions. "You're a wealthy woman now," Lucas observed when she shared the news. "Free to go anywhere, do anything you choose." They were walking along the creek that ran through the Dawson property, enjoying the crisp autumn air. Lydia had been spending more and more time at the ranch, learning about the business from both Lucas and Elizabeth, who had proven herself quite adept at managing the accounts. "Yes, I suppose I am," Lydia agreed. "Though money means less to me now than it once did. I've learned that freedom and safety are worth more than any fortune." Lucas stopped walking, turning to face her. "Does that mean you've decided to stay in Hayes City permanently?" "I have," she said, smiling up at him. "If I'm welcome." "You know you are." He took both her hands in his. "In fact, I was hoping you might consider making your stay even more permanent." He reached into his pocket, producing a small velvet box. "This belonged to my grandmother. I've been carrying it for weeks, waiting for the right moment." Lydia's heart pounded as he opened the box to reveal a simple but beautiful ring, a deep blue sapphire flanked by small diamonds, set in gold. "I'm not as eloquent as those Eastern gentlemen you probably knew," Lucas said, his voice deeper than usual with emotion. "But I love you, Lydia Collins. I want to build a life with you if you'll have me." Tears blurred her vision as she looked from the ring to his face. "Are you sure? I come with complications, with a past." "We all have pasts," he said simply. "It's the future I'm interested in, our future together." "Then yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you, Lucas Dawson." The kiss that followed sealed their promise, deep and tender under the wide Kansas sky. When they finally parted, Lucas rested his forehead against hers, their breath mingling in the cool air. "Stay," he whispered, echoing the word that had been in his heart since he first saw her on that dusty street months before. "Stay with me always." "Always," she agreed, knowing she had found not just a home, but a heart that recognized her own, across all the distance and darkness she had traveled to find it. Their wedding was held the following spring, when wildflowers carpeted the prairie in a riot of color. Jonathan Collins traveled from Philadelphia for the occasion, his health much improved, his joy in his daughter's happiness evident to all. Mrs. Sullivan wept openly as Lydia walked down the aisle of the small church in a gown of her own design, simple but elegant, befitting a woman who had found her true self in the vast openness of the frontier. Lucas waited for her at the altar, his eyes never leaving hers as she approached. When he took her hand, she felt the same certainty she had experienced that day on the porch, that this was right, that this was home. The minister spoke the traditional words, but it was the personal vows they had written that moved the congregation to tears. "I promise to see you always," Lucas said, his voice steady and true. "Not as you were, or as others might wish you to be, but as you are and as you wish to become. I promise to walk beside you, not before or behind, as we build our life together." Lydia's voice trembled slightly as she responded, "I promise to trust in the love we've found, to believe in its strength even in dark moments. I promise to be your partner in all things, to share your joys and sorrows, and to remember always that home isn't a place, but the heart that recognizes its own." As they were pronounced husband and wife, and Lucas kissed her with tender reverence, Lydia felt the last shadows of her past fade away. She had come to Hayes City under a new name, seeking only safety and a fresh start. She had found instead a love that saw beyond names and pretenses to the truth of her heart, a love that had whispered stay when she most needed to belong. And stay she would, beneath these endless skies, with this man whose heart had recognized hers from the first moment their eyes met on a dusty frontier street. 2 years later, as Lucas held their newborn son in his strong, gentle hands, Lydia watched the wonder on his face with a fullness of heart she had once thought impossible. "He has your eyes," Lucas whispered, touching the infant's tiny hand, "and your determination. Did you see how he fought the blankets when the doctor tried to wrap him?" Lydia laughed softly. "A true Dawson, already wanting to be free." Elizabeth entered the bedroom quietly, her face lighting up at the sight of her nephew. "He's beautiful," she said, perching on the edge of the bed. "Have you decided on a name?" Lucas and Lydia exchanged a look. They had discussed names at length, considering family traditions from both sides. "Jonathan Lucas Dawson," Lydia said, smiling as her husband placed their son in her arms, "for both the men who helped me find my way." Lucas bent to kiss her forehead, his eyes suspiciously bright. A perfect name for a perfect boy. As the sun set outside their window, painting the prairie in shades of gold and crimson, Lydia thought of how far she had come from that frightened woman who stepped off the stage in Hayes City. The journey hadn't been easy, but each step, each choice had led her here to this moment, this family, this love. "Are you happy?" Lucas asked softly, as if reading her thoughts. Lydia looked up at him, at the face that had become as familiar and essential to her as her own reflection. "More than I ever believed possible." And in the quiet of their bedroom, with their son sleeping peacefully between them and the vast Kansas sky deepening to indigo outside, Lydia Collins Dawson knew she had truly, finally, come home.